Hi everybody, Jacob Reed here from ReviewEcon.com. This is the first in a series of videos that will cover all of the macroeconomic concepts you need to know for your exams in macroeconomics. This first video is all about Unit 1. It covers basic macroeconomic concepts. This video goes alongside the Total Review Booklet from ReviewEcon.com. If you want to support this channel and pick up a copy, head down to the links below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into the content.
And away we go!
First up, we've got scarcity. Pretty simple concept here. Scarcity is the fundamental problem we have in economics. It's everywhere and it's pervasive. Scarcity is the inability of our scarce resources to satisfy human wants. We don't have enough of everything we want in this world. We don't have enough cupcakes. We don't have enough shoes. Heck, I don't have enough Ferraris. Scarcity is pervasive, it's everywhere, and it's always the first concept you're going to learn in economics. How do you know if something is scarce? Well, first of all, it's likely to have a positive price. If you have to pay money for it, even if it's a very low amount, it's definitely scarce. We might have to come up with a system of allocating whatever it is we're talking about. Organ transplants, for example, are definitely scarce, so we have a very complicated system of deciding who gets the next kidney or heart or liver. Less is available than is wanted. That's simply the basic definition of scarcity. Opportunity cost is involved in this good. If you want it, you have to give something up to get it. Those are some easy tests to determine if an item is scarce. Now, we're not talking about shortage here. Shortage means that we ran out at a particular price. You'll learn more about shortages when you get to Unit 2. Here, we are also not talking about needs. We're talking about wants. Wants are unlimited and resources are limited. And the reason we have scarcity is because factors of production are limited. We don't have enough land. Land is all of the gifts of nature. That's our first resource. We don't have enough labor either. Labor is the mental or physical work of human individuals. We have alongside that human capital. That's the skills and knowledge of the workforce, and you learn a lot about that in macroeconomics, but it can be important here as well. More skilled workers are better workers. Next, we have physical capital. That's the machines and tools that are used to produce goods and services. Last of all, we have entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs take the land, labor, capital, mix it all together, take a huge risk, and produce a good or service seeking a profit. Microeconomics focuses a lot on these businesses, or firms as we often call them, that are started by entrepreneurs, seeking a profit. That's their goal. All of these things lead us to production possibilities. We have scarce resources. Those force us to make choices. Those choices have opportunity costs, and we can organize systems to deal with that scarcity with the command economy or the market economy. We can graph all of this with the production possibilities curve. The production possibilities curve is a graph that shows the maximum combinations of two different goods or categories of goods that can be produced with fixed resources. We may be looking at individuals who can decide whether or not they're going to produce lawnmowers or weed eaters, or we could be looking at an entire economy that's producing guns or butter or consumer goods and capital goods. Let's look at a production possibilities curve. Here's one for robots and corn. Since we have a bowed out shape like this that's concave to the origin, as this economy produces more and more corn, they give up greater and greater amounts of robots. We can see that bowed out shape means that we have increasing costs of production. What that tells us is that the resources that are used to produce robots are not perfectly adaptable to the production of corn. If the resources that are used to make robots were also really good and equally good at making corn, then we would see a more straight curve like we have here. Here we have cakes and cookies. In this production possibilities curve, we have a straight line, and that shows us what's called constant costs. When we see a production possibilities curve that looks like this, it means that the resources that are used to make both goods are well adapted to each other. Some might even say perfectly adaptable. The resources that are really good at making cookies are also likely to be really good at making cake. As a result, we would expect a relatively straight curve for those two items. If you see a production possibilities curve, it's important to remember that any point on the curve is considered efficient a productively efficient use of resources. Whether you're making only robots and zero corn, only corn and zero robots, or somewhere in between, any point on that production possibilities curve is efficient. Any points inside the curve are inefficient. It means that you're not using your resources properly. In a macroeconomy sense, any point inside the curve is likely to mean that the economy is suffering from a recession. You have unemployed workers who are available to work, but they aren't being utilized. So you are having less production, in this case, of robots and corn, by producing somewhere within this production possibilities curve. Points outside the curve are impossible. You cannot produce outside your own production possibilities curve. What we can do, though, through specialization in trade, you might be able to consume outside of your production possibilities curve, and we'll learn more about that in a minute when we get to our comparative advantage review. What shifts this production possibilities curve? Well, it can move in or out as a result of changes in the quality or quantity of resources. Here we have growth. That's what it looks like. If we have increases in productivity or better resources, or we just have more resources, land, labor, capital, or entrepreneurship, that can shift our production possibilities curve outward, and we will have more ability to produce, in this case, corn and robots. If we have a loss of resources, maybe there's a natural disaster that destroys a lot of factories, we might see a shift inward of the production possibilities curve. That means we have fewer robots and corn that can be produced with our current lower level of resources. If we have new technology that only impacts the production of one of these goods, we would see it something like this. Here we have technology that has increased the production of corn, but hasn't changed the production of robots. It kicks out the corn side, but it doesn't change the robot side. Here we would see an increase in the opportunity cost for producing robots, because we're now losing even more corn if we decide to make robots instead. On to comparative advantage. This is probably the hardest part of this first unit. It can be very tricky and it involves a lot of math. But the first part you need to know isn't real difficult. It's called absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is the ability to produce more or using fewer resources than someone else or some other country. Here, let's take a look at Amy and Eric. They can either do a brake job on a car or paint a car. Since Amy can do these things at a lower number of hours, that's units of labor here, then it means that Amy has the absolute advantage in both of these tasks. Now, hours are inputs. Here we have another problem, strawberries and zucchini. Here we've got tons of strawberries and zucchini that can be produced. Now, instead of looking at using fewer resources, which is hours or inputs, now we're looking at the finished product. This is the ability to produce more strawberries. In this case, we're looking for the larger number. And here we have Henry is able to produce more strawberries and more zucchini. So Henry has the absolute advantage in the production of both of these goods. Now on to comparative advantage. The definition of comparative advantage is the ability to produce something at a lower opportunity cost. When it comes to inputs, which means that we're talking about resources that go into the production of something, I use the formula with it over. That's the mnemonic. That's how I remember it, which means that the opportunity cost of A is it, A divided by B. Let's take a look at those numbers for Amy and Eric again. Now, these are input questions, so let's figure out the opportunity cost for Amy. Amy can produce one brake job with the opportunity cost of it, her number she has for that brake job, which is 1 hour, divided by the number of hours it takes her to produce a painted car, which is 1/6. Now, the opportunity cost for a painted car is it, 6 divided by 1, which means 6 brake jobs. Eric, on the other hand, we're going to do the math again for him. Eric can produce a brake job with an opportunity cost of it, 2 hours for the brake job, divided by 8 hours for a painted car. That equals 1/4 of a painted car for every brake job he does. For painted cars, the opportunity cost is 8 divided by 2, which gives us an opportunity cost of 4 brake jobs for every painted car that Eric does. Now we're going to take a look at the opportunity costs and circle the goods with the lower opportunity cost. Amy can produce a brake job with 1/6 of a painted car lost. And that is a smaller opportunity cost than Eric's 1/4 of a paint job. That means Amy has the comparative advantage in the production of brake jobs. Eric, on the other hand, has the comparative advantage for painted cars because his opportunity cost is 4 brake jobs, while Amy's is 6. And since 4 is a lower opportunity cost, Eric has the comparative advantage for painted cars. The other type of comparative advantage question you are likely to get is an output question. When you see an output question, that means the numbers that are talked about in the question are finished products. In order to calculate the opportunity cost of an output question, I use the other over formula. Other over is the mnemonic that I use to help me remember this. That means the opportunity cost of producing A is the other one, B, the numbers for B, divided by the numbers for A. And that will give you the opportunity cost for producing 1 unit of A. You could see output questions using production possibilities curves. They're usually straight line or constant cost production possibilities curves. You could see it like this. If you see it, just go to the numbers on those axes. Those are the ones you're going to be using for calculating. You could also see it as a chart or a table, as we just saw with the input questions of ours. Now we're going to calculate these. Here we have Jason and Henry. These two people are going to either produce tons of strawberries or tons of zucchini. So let's take a look at these numbers. Jason here can produce 1 ton of strawberries at an opportunity cost of the other one, 4 tons of zucchinis, divided by the 8 tons of strawberries. That gives us half a ton of zucchinis lost for every ton of strawberries that Jason produces. On the other hand, flip it around. 1 ton of zucchinis is going to cost him 8, that's the other one, 8 tons of strawberries, divided by the 4 tons of zucchini. Gives us 2 tons of strawberries that Jason is going to lose out on every time he produces a ton of zucchini. For Henry, we're going to do this the same way. 1 ton of strawberries, the opportunity cost is the other one, 6 tons of zucchini divided by those 10 tons of strawberries. Gives us 3/5 of a ton of zucchini for every ton of strawberries he produces. 1 ton of zucchini will equal, flip it around, it's the reciprocal here, 10/6, which is 1 2/3 of a ton of strawberries for every ton of zucchini Henry produces. Just like before, we're going to circle the goods of the lower opportunity costs, and then we will see who has the comparative advantage. Jason has the comparative advantage for strawberries, and Henry has the comparative advantage for zucchini. Because 1/2 is lower than 3/5, and 2 is greater than 1 2/3. So we circled the lower opportunity costs, and that's our comparative advantages. The last kind of thing you're going to get with comparative advantage is to figure out mutually beneficial terms of trade. Terms of trade that will benefit both entities will fall between their opportunity costs. Let's take a look at the opportunity cost for Amy and Eric. 1 painted car was worth 6 brake jobs for Amy and 4 brake jobs for Eric. That means that one painted car should be worth between 4 and 6 brake jobs. Flip it around and we can look at the other side. 1 brake job will be worth between 1/4 and 1/6 of a painted car. If they trade within those ranges, then it will benefit both as a result. If we're outside that range, somebody is getting ripped off and would be unwilling to trade if they're acting rationally. Let's take a look at Henry and Jason again and look at their opportunity costs. 1 ton of strawberries will be worth between half a ton of zucchini and 3/5 of a ton of zucchini. The law of demand tells us that ceteris paribus, consumers buy more of a good at low prices and less of a good at higher prices. That means that we have a downward sloping demand curve when we graph it out because there's an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. So when price rises, that causes movement along the curve. Increases in price cause a decrease in quantity demanded. Likewise, a decrease in price causes a movement down that curve and increases quantity demanded. Special thing to note is that price changes quantity demanded. Price does not change demand. It's a key thing that pops up over and over again, and it will trick you if you aren't paying attention. Price changes quantity, not demand. Remember it. There are some things besides price that do shift demand curves. Here are some of our non-price determinants of demand, or demand shifters as they're often called. First, we've got tastes and preferences. When there's an increase in consumer tastes, it will shift our demand curve to the right, increasing that demand. If there's a decrease in tastes and preferences, like something becomes unpopular or it falls out of fashion, that will cause a decrease in demand or a shift to the left. If there are more buyers, also called market size, that will cause an increase in the demand for a product. If there are fewer buyers available, that will cause a decrease in the demand. The next one we have is prices of related goods. When it comes to prices of related goods, there are two types that you need to be aware of. First of all, we've got substitutes. When it comes to substitutes, when the price of one goes up, demand for the other one also goes up. Substitutes mean that one good can replace the other. So when the price of one goes up, people buy less of that good and they buy more of the other one instead. Things like jam and honey. I can use either one on my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or peanut butter and honey sandwiches. Either one works. So in this example, they would be substitutes for each other. If the price of jelly goes up, the demand for honey is going to go up as well. For complements, that means one goes with the other. When the price of one goes up, demand for the other actually goes down. Here we have the complements, jelly and peanut butter. When the price of jelly goes up, people buy less jelly, but it also causes us to decrease our demand for peanut butter because they go hand in hand. Bread and butter, toothpaste and toothbrushes, ice cream and ice cream cones. All different examples of complementary goods. Next, we have changes in income. For most goods, like shoes, when you have more income, you buy more of that product. So an increase in consumer income will increase the demand, and a decrease in consumer income will decrease the demand. The other type of good is called inferior goods. With inferior goods, when incomes rise, people buy less of those products. So incomes rise and demand actually decreases. Those are things like one-ply toilet paper, or top ramen, or condensed soup. When incomes rise, people buy less of those products. The last one is expectations for the future. Sometimes guesses about what's going to happen later on impact consumer behavior today. That's why when it comes to buying a television, I'm going to wait until Black Friday for when they're on sale. So I demand fewer today, decrease my demand, and then I buy more later. So that expectation for the future changes demand today. If any of those things change, it can cause our demand curve to shift. If we have a shift to the right, that is an increase. A rightward shift is an increase. That means there is a higher quantity demanded at all prices, not just at one particular price. If we have a shift to the left, that is a decrease. A lower quantity demanded at all available prices. A shift to the left. Now let's talk about supply curves. Supply curves are the opposite of demand curves. Before, there was an inverse relationship between price and quantity. With supply, there's a direct relationship. Ceteris paribus, producers produce and sell more at high prices and less at low prices. It's true so often, it's the law of supply. It gives us an upward sloping supply curve. And when prices go up, we see an increase in the quantity supplied, shown as movement up that supply curve. If price goes down, it shows movement down that curve, which gives us a decrease in the quantity supplied. Special note, just like with demand, price changes quantity, or quantity supplied in this case. Price does not change supply. Make sure you know that. It will trick you on your test. But there, of course, are things that do shift supply. We call those non-price determinants of supply. These are your supply shifters. First of all, we've got input prices. Those are the things that go into the production. If the price of a resource that goes into the production goes up, it will decrease supply. If it goes down, it will increase supply. Then we've got government tools, taxes. Per unit taxes decrease supplies. We've got subsidies. Subsidies increase supply. And the last thing is regulations. Regulations will generally, depending on the type of regulation, decrease supply. The third thing we've got is the number of sellers. All right, sometimes people say competition for this one. An increase in the number of businesses that are producing a product will increase the supply. A decrease in the number of businesses producing a product will decrease the supply. The next one we've got is technology. Increases in technology also increase supply. Prices of other goods can sometimes impact supply as well. If the price of wheat goes up, farmers may make more wheat and decrease their supply of corn as a result. The last one is producer expectations. Just like with consumers, the future impacts what businesses do today. If any of those things change, it actually causes a shift in the supply curve. Rightward shift, just like with demand, is going to be an increase. Make sure you understand the left and right instead of up and down, because a downward shift for supply is actually a rightward shift, and that's an increase. On the other side, a leftward shift is going to be a decrease. We're talking about lower quantities supplied at every price. The next thing we're going to do is talk about market equilibrium. We find market equilibrium when we mix supply and demand on the same graph. Where the two curves intersect gives us our equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. It's the price where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. The market seeks that equilibrium price and quantity. Sometimes prices are above equilibrium, and that causes quantity supplied to be greater than quantity demanded. That means we have a surplus, and prices will eventually fall back to equilibrium. Sometimes we have a price that's below equilibrium. When that happens, we will have a shortage, where the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. Prices will eventually rise, seeking that equilibrium point. Of course, the equilibrium price and quantity can change when there's a shift in either demand or supply. An increase in demand causes the equilibrium price to increase and the equilibrium quantity to increase. A decrease in demand causes the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity to both decrease. An increase in the supply will cause the equilibrium price to decrease and the equilibrium quantity to increase. A decrease in the supply will cause the equilibrium price to increase and the equilibrium quantity to decrease. Now, I don't suggest you memorize all these shifts. Just when in doubt, graph it out. Sketch out your little graph and see what happens to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity on your paper. Most of the time when you get a question, one variable will change and one curve will shift. Occasionally, you could have two variables change. When that occurs, it is possible you could have two curves shifting. Double shifts get a little bit tricky because one of the axes will be indeterminate. Here we have a decrease in supply. That caused the price to go up and the quantity to go down. So we move from one equilibrium point to another equilibrium point. If we add another shift, an increase in demand here, we now have a third equilibrium point. How does this combined double shift impact the price and quantity? Well, both shifts increased the price. That means we know for sure that the price is going to be increased. But on the x-axis there, the first shift decreased the quantity and the second shift increased the quantity. Since these shifts contradict, it really depends on the size of the shifts as to where the final equilibrium quantity is, and as a result, that axis will be indeterminate. Here's another example of a different double shift. We're starting off with an increase in demand this time, which causes the equilibrium point to move, increasing the price and increasing the quantity. If we add another shift, this time it's a increase in supply, we now have a third equilibrium point, and here on that x-axis, the quantity increased on both shifts, whereas the price increased with one shift and decreased with the other shift. Equilibrium quantity will be determined as an increase, but the equilibrium price will be indeterminate. Whew, we made it through it. Now that's everything you need to know for that unit. If you already knew all of that stuff, you are on your way to doing really well on your next exam. If you still need some help, head down to the links below and head over to reviewecon.com, where there are lots of games and activities to help you practice and relearn those skills that you need to know. If you want to support this channel, please like and subscribe below, and then head over to reviewecon.com and purchase the Total Review Booklet with all of the skills you need to ace your next exam. Thank you. I'll see you next time.